What's up guys and welcome to my Seele buffed guide. Seele is one of the 4 characters getting a buff in the 4.2 update, and today I'm taking you over everything you do need to know in order to understand and build her, including a kit overview on her buffed kit, best Lightcones, best Relic sets and Planar Ornaments, stats for Mainstats and Substats, and finally some general team building. Do note the background footage is unbuffed Seele, as I do have to record this in 4.1 since I do not have access to creator server. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you are looking at the background footage. Seele's basic attack will deal quantum damage based off her attack to a designated enemy. Her skill increases her speed by 25% and deals quantum damage to a designated enemy. Anytime someone on the team attacks an enemy whose current HP percentage is 50% or lower, Seele will automatically launch a skill at them for 1 time that does not consume skill points or regenerate energy, and is triggered 1 time per turn, resetting at the start of her turn. Her ultimate lets her enter the amplification state and deals quantum damage based off her attack to a designated enemy. Her talent lets her enter the amplification state when defeating an enemy with basic attack, skill, or ultimate, and will receive an extra turn, and in the amplification state, damage dealt will be increased by 80% for 3 turns, and defeating an enemy during the extra turn provided by Resurgence will not trigger another Resurgence. The technique allows Seele to gain stealth for 20 seconds, where she can't be detected by enemies, and entering battle by attacking enemies will allow her to immediately enter amplification state and deal quantum damage based off her skill multiplier to a random enemy 1 time. That is a guaranteed crit. For her traces, her A2 will increase her damage by 50% when defeating an enemy target that stacks up to 3 times and lasts for 3 turns. E4 increases quantum respite by 25% in the amplification state, and A6 will give her 20% action advance when using basic attack. For her Eidolons, her E1 will make it to where when she does damage to enemies who have 80% HP or lower, it'll increase her crit rate by 15% and ignore 20% of the target's defense. Her E2 allows her speed boost effect of her skill to stack 2 times, so it's up to 50% now. E4 regenerates 15 energy when defeating an enemy, and E6 allows her to inflict an enemy with Butterfly Flurry when attacking with her ultimate for 3 turns. Attacking an enemy with Butterfly Fury will additionally make them take an instance of true damage equal to 30% of her ultimate damage after receiving an attack. If an enemy under Butterfly Flurry is defeated by any unit, Seele's talent will also be triggered. For the best Lightcone options, overall the best one is still her signature Lightcone, providing 18% crit, and increase to skill and basic attack damage by 6% every 10 speed exceeding 100, and also increasing the crit damage of her ultimate by 12% that stacks up to 6 times. She is, just like most, a character you want to build with 100% crit rate, because missing a crit is absolutely devastating, and if it's not 100%, it's 50%. So the crit rate stick is nice. On top of that, you can get up to a 36% increase to basic attack and skill damage, which skill damage is going to be a big part of her kit playstyle, and also up to a 72% increase to the crit damage of her ultimate, which is also a lot and a big portion of her playstyle. So it just amps up a lot of her actual kit, and is also easy to get the requirements, although this can depend. If you have E2, you always will be able to get this full effect even without speed rolls, since she does have over 110 base speed. And then with E2, you can stack up her 25% speed buff twice, so 50%, so you can get well over 160. Which is how much you would need to fully stack this. However, if you are before E1 and you still do a base speed build, then you might be a little bit short, but even if you can't fully stack it, it is still a strong option. If you're pairing her with Sparkle, one that's as good, if not better than her signature, is actually Archer's signature Lightcone, providing 60% crit rate. When entering combat, if having 6 skill point limit or higher, increases the wearer's attack by 40%, and every use of the wearer's skill will further increase the wearer's attack by 10% up to 4 times. So it provides you crit rate and up to 80% attack, which is very good. Just you need to have the requirement of having over 6 skill points, and Sparkle is one of the only ways you could do that. It doesn't really matter though, Sparkle is one of her best teammates, so most teams would have her, but there are some iterations where you don't, so you do need to keep that in mind. Otherwise, this would be the next best option to use. Photoshop Lightcone also does work, providing 8% crit rate and an additional 8% crit rate when attacking someone with HP 50% or less, and defeating an enemy will increase the wearer's attack by 20%, and at S5, both values of crit rate is 16% with 40% attack defeating an enemy. So upwards to a 32% increase of crit rate is extremely good. However, even when using this Lightcone, you don't want to fully build with the fact of the 32% in mind, since a lot of times you'll be attacking an enemy that doesn't have below 50%, and missing over 60% crit rate is going to be pretty tragic, so you mainly want to have this as a failsafe for the last 5 to 10% crit rate at most. So it's still a good fill, especially once you do reach the requirement. And defeating an enemy is integral to her playstyle, so this part should usually be active for 40% attack. However, the time it's not active will significantly decrease the performance of this Lightcone, but when the conditions are met, this is also very strong and makes her a lot easier to build. Swordplay is also a decent option, which will make it to where when the wearer hits the same enemy target, damage dealt will increase by 8%, stacking up to 5 times, and changing targets will dispel the effect, and at S5 it's 16% damage dealt, so you can get a massive increase in damage dealt against the enemy you are attacking. This does make her a lot more restrictive though, since Seele's playstyle often can have you switching targets between multiple smaller enemies on the side, but since her skill hits a bunch of times, you can stack it up very easily. But again, this is one of the more restrictive options, as you can't really necessarily change targets as you want to. So do keep that in mind when you are using this, but depending on the stage, if you mainly have to focus down on an elite or boss enemy, then it can be very good. For relic sets, it still does depend, but the technical best one you can run is Genius. 2-piece increasing quantum damage by 10%, and the 4-piece when the wearer does damage to an enemy target ignores 10% defense, and if they have quantum weakness, an additional 10% defense ignore. 2-piece will increase all her sources of damage since she does deal quantum damage, and 4-piece provides you up to 20% defense ignore, and defense ignore in this game is something you would have high value of, as it is a really good increase in damage, but it does get way stronger when you get to like 75 plus, reaching upwards to 100%, so this depends on if you have a shredder on the team to help you stack it more, or if you have support idolons like Sparkle E2, Sunday E1, so on and so forth. If it's just 20% on its own, it's really not going to do too much for you. And if you're someone that doesn't really get high defense shred / ignore, in that case you would instead run Scholar, which can be just as good if not better. 2-piece crit rate and 4-piece increases damage dealt by skill and ultimate by 20%, and after using ultimate, additionally increases damage dealt by the next skill by 25%. 2-piece makes her easier to build. 4-piece increases her main sources of damage being skill and ultimate, and then once you do use your ultimate, the next time you do a skill will do even more damage. So at lower defense ignore / shred values, again, Scholar is going to be overall better than Genius, but once you get to like the higher like 60s to 70s, 80s, so on, that's when Genius set is going to be better. But another requirement of Genius is for them to have the quantum weakness, which not every enemy will, and you're not always going to run her with someone like Silverwolf to implant it. So it's a lot more restrictive, and there's a lot more conditions for it to be better, so Scholar is a lot more consistent. If you don't have either of those 4 pieces, then you would be stuck with 2-piece until you get a 4-piece, which you really want to have one of the 4 pieces to get the best effects. But if you do have to run 2-piece, then it would be 2-piece of one of the quantum increasing sets, so 2-piece Poet or 2-piece quantum set with the Genius set. Combine that with 2-piece of an attack % increase or something that works with like crit. So if you need crit rate, Scholar or World Remaking. If you need crit damage, Wave Strider or the Everglorious 2 pieces. And then for attack % increasing sets, you can run Hero with Sorik, Prisoner, or Musketeers. If you're running a teammate that constantly has enemies debuffed, then you can also do 2-piece Pioneer. For Planar Ornaments, this also does depend on what your Seele speed situation is. If you have E2 or you have a build that allows you to reach the full 160 speed plus, then Glamoth is going to be best in slot. With 12% attack and where speed equal to 135/160 will make them do 12%/18% more damage, so extra attack and also more damage. Even at 135, so just the 12% damage, this is still almost the best in slot, but there is one that is slightly better. The advantage of this is it's also impacting her ultimate compared to the one I'm going to talk about. But yeah, when you do reach 160 speed and get the 80% damage, this is the overall best. The next option would be Rudolin Arena with 8% crit rate and also reaching 70% or higher crit rate, which shouldn't be a problem. Will make damage up by basic attack and skill increase by 20%. So some crit rate to make it easier to build, and also skill damage increase, which is going to be the main primary focus. Unfortunately, it doesn't impact her ultimate damage, which is a bit unfortunate. And her basic attack is also integral to weave in sometimes, depending on your team and playstyle, so that increase is also nice. So if you're not reaching 160 speed on Glamoth, then Rudolin Arena is very slightly better. If pairing her with Paramount's Terra Dawning, you can use Banana Amusement for 16% crit damage, and an additional 32% crit damage when a target summoned by the wearer is on the field. Since she does not have the ability to summon someone, you would need Dawning to make her bondmate, attach the dragon, and then you would have the full requirement for 48% crit damage. So this would be the other one that's just as good as the others if you are running Dawning, Paramount's Terra on the team. For the main stats on the relics, for the body, you run crit rate or crit damage corresponding to which one you need more. For the feat, you can do attack percent or speed. It depends on your overall goals and how many actions you want to aim for Seele, but do account for the 25% speed buff she has in her base kit, the extra 25% you can get if you have E2. You can actually utilize that by keeping her on attack percent boots to get better damage output. For the orb, run quantum damage, and for the link rope, run attack percent. For the substats, first is your overall speed tuning goals. There's so many different things you can do with speed tuning, especially on a character like her who's able to gain a good amount of speed, is able to gain extra turns and stuff. If you're aiming for a -1 setup, of course, just get her to 1 speed above your action advancer like Sunday or Bronia. If you're running a version where you need to skill with her first, so the 25% speed buff would put her above the actual action support, then of course you would tune accordingly. A lot of times if you have something like E2, then you can leave her completely at base speed and ignore speed entirely, since you're going to be able to shoot up to the 160s just by having her skill stack twice. So it overall depends if you are running a team where she doesn't have any action advances, which is very uncommon. In that case, you would probably build her with speed, get as much as you can. With action advances, you would just aim to put her 1 above them once all the buffs are active. Sparkle specifically, you do want to have her -1 since it's harder to control. And then running a case where Seele might not be able to fully outspeed Sparkle. With all the speed buffs she does gain, it makes it a little more wasteful for the action advance. So even though Sparkle will not always give her a full turn to get to where she does still grant an action to the point it does matter, makes it better to have Sparkle usually 1 below your actual Seele speed in battle. Past that is your generic crit rate, crit damage, attack percent. For crit rate, be sure you have 100% in battle. Honestly, on Seele, this is non-negotiable. Missing a crit on her is very, very bad, especially with her ultimate, so just aim to get 100%. External sources can't help, like Sunday crit rate buff, Sparkle Lightcones, so do account for that. Her E1 is also something you can factor in, but do note the 80% HP requirement is there. Even when using the Her Shop Lightcone, you still want to have around 90%, and then again, tune that with any other crit rate buff you do have. For crit damage, getting it around 160% or higher is good. That would obviously depend if you are running external crit rate buffs, so you can focus on like crit damage body and stuff. With those setups, having upwards from 190% to 200% is going to be more preferable, so just get as much as you can. And then getting your attack around 3000 is also preferable. Now for some general team building, usually Seele does have another action advancer to be put alongside her, whether that be a setup with Sunday or Bronia still, whether that be Sparkle, whether that even be a action advancer with a slower output like RMC. There usually always is going to be someone giving her more turns. Sparkle with her buff is usually on the better teams just because her buffs are so strong. So you can have these two together. Another really good teammate for Seele is actually Ceredra. Ceredra does work very good, even more so after the buff because she is able to count that extra skill you can get when attacking an enemy with 50% or lower HP and actually clone that. So that can actually further increase output. You can get more resurgent procs with Ceredra clone. There's a lot of cool interactions you can do. Plus she also has her own speed buff, so that can help you with sub building or reaching very high thresholds. For sustaining, you would usually either use Woeful or you would use Danheng. Either or are fine. Danheng is a bit more preferable, but Woeful is fine. And then sub out accordingly. Again, if you don't have Sparkle available, you could use one of the other ones like Sunday or Bronia. So in my case, I'll just put Sunday here. If you don't have Ceredra, you can still use someone else that just supports, like you can use Tribi. In this slot, you can use a debuffer as well. Cypher works fine. You can also very much use someone like OG Silverwolf. So you can also have your team look like this. And then again, for the last slot, sustain. If you're going for a really difficult setup with the sustainless team, then you take out the sustain, put out another support. So in this case, you could put Ceredra there. You could put Cypher, Tribi, again, whatever option you do have available there could work. And that is the full updated 4.2 buff Seele guide. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, drop a like, it would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell for future videos like this along with all the tips to all content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.